Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Contours, the Cambridge Literary Studies Hour. My name is Ato Quayson, and I am Professor of English and Chair of the English Department at Stanford University. I will be the host of each episode. Each episode of Contours will address a pressing issue, theme, or concept in 21st century literary studies. In many of these episodes, I will be hosting a dialogue with an author or authors from the Cambridge University Press List. Others will feature a panel of experts in the field, and I will introduce that episode. We aim to provide an invigorating, accessible forum for critical debate and reflection to engage and help students, teachers, and general readers. Contours will range from medieval literature to the present day, from all areas of global literary studies in the northern and southern hemispheres. Each episode will be approximately an hour long and will be available via YouTube on our new Contours page on Cambridge Core. In today's episode, we'll be focusing on the recently published Decolonizing the English Literary Curriculum, edited by myself and Ankhi Mukherjee, Professor of English at Oxford University. Kasia Boddy, Professor of English and Fellow of Fitzwilliam College at the University of Cambridge, has very generously agreed to interview us for this episode. We hope you find this episode of Contours, the Cambridge Literary Studies Hour, useful, enjoyable, and relevant, and more importantly, that you'll be encouraged to join us again in the next edition. Thank you very much. So, Kasia, over to you.
Thank you. Maybe before I start asking you some questions about the book, I'll just introduce you both a little bit more to the listeners, because partly it's to introduce everyone to how you came to write, to edit this book and to think about, because both of you have written and edited many different kinds of books, which you bring different expertise to it. So Ankhi's include Unseen City, The Psychic Lives of the Urban Poor, published in 2021, which won the Columbia University Robert S. Liebert Award, and What is a Classic, Postcolonial Rewriting and Invention of the Canon, 2014, which won the British Academy's Mary Rose Crawshaw Prize for English Literature. She's also edited a concise companion to psychoanalysis, literature, and culture in 2014, and edited After Lacan in 2018. And I think you're currently writing a very short introduction to post-colonial literature coming out next year. Ato, as everyone listening to the podcast will know, his books include The Cambridge History of Post-Colonial Literature, Tragedy, and Post-Colonial Literature, which won the Warren Brooks Prize for Literary Criticism, and also Oxford Street, Accra, City Life, and the Itineraries of Transnationalism, which won the Urban History Association Prize. He's editor of the Cambridge Journal of Postcolonial Literary Inquiry, and has also curated Critic Reading Writing, a YouTube channel dedicated to themes in interdisciplinary literary humanities. He's elected Fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Humanities, Arts and Sciences, the Royal Society of Canada, the British Academy, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So welcome to you both, and with all that behind you and in front of you, my first question is, why did you decide to do this book? What led you to this book?
Let me, if I can start. Thank you, Kasia, for the question. Well, Ankhi and I have been thinking about the curriculum, how to teach it, and it's been variant forms and so on for a long time. But things came to a head after the killing of George Floyd in May of 2020. And we began to actually interrogate ourselves. What might we do to our sense of injustice, which was shared by many people? But we are professors of English literature. This is our vocation. This is what we do. It helped also that we had also been in constant conversations with Ray Ryan, who, in talking about it, and him and I especially were, lamenting the state of affairs in the United States, and he liked the idea of a volume on decolonizing. So it was partly serendipity, partly it was the historical circumstances, and partly the fact that we had been having these kinds of conversations for years and years. So that's what led to the volume.
Thank you, Ato. And for me, it was, of course, the killing of George Floyd and also the return of Rhodes Must Fall to Oxford. And, I mean, I was born and I grew up in an erstwhile colony, India, and my landscape would be flat if we removed all the horrible relics of horrible history. But that's kind of the point, that that's a post-colonial space. That is where you can ignore history, you can museumize history, you can assume a critical distance. So, you can actually even sort of chuckle at some ridiculous and absurd sort of restrictions against natives. But this is not a post-colonial space, and in a way, the death of George Floyd left no doubt about the through lines between systemic racism and, of course, racist Western colonization in Asia and Africa. And of course, I mean, the usual response is that the situation is in Britain is quite different from the situation in the United States. And yes, of course, the Black Britons are not treated the same way as African Americans. But this is where I mean, David Olusoga talked about this around the time of the second Rhodes Must Fall, that the problem is that it is not as better as some would like to believe. And the statistics are pretty horrendous, that Black men are stopped and searched 9 times the rate of white men. And I could sort of reel these out. Just this year, there's this charity Inquest. It published that Black people were 7 times more likely to die than white people following restraint by police. So, this really kind of, in a way, it it changed my attitude to Rhodes Must Fall, which I've always been sympathetic to, but that I did not feel with the same kind of urgency. And there's an article when Ato and I first started discussing this. I sent him an article by somebody called Nakul Krishna, who was a former Rhodes scholar. It was published in N+1. And he talks in that article about the removal of a painting of George Nathaniel Curzon. This is the sort of Viceroy of India who oversaw one of the major famines in 1899 and presided over the 1905 partition of Bengal. So this was removed from the dining hall in Balliol. And he says that he didn't know about anyone asking for it. And he assumes that this was sort of very discreet swap. But there is one line he wrote in that piece that I thought was very, very telling. He says, I suppose this is how colonialism works: taking without saying please or thank you, and giving back less than is owed without saying sorry. And this was a very, very sort of important moment for me to kind of, in a way, think about what I could do to help the cause. And I think not taking down the Statue of Rhodes means that we don't take down our demands that, such a sort of bizarre relic of a white supremacist steeped in racism and colonialism. I mean, he actually had an Oxford degree, which he earned over 8 long years, and he used it to consolidate his position in the Cape Parliament. And it really consolidated for me the fact that I was also not willing to take down that conversation.
Before following up on some of those things that you've said, Ankhi, and asking about the details of the book, I wonder if you could both say something about the title, Decolonizing the English Literary Curriculum, rather than say words that we've heard already today, post-colonial or decolonial or anti-colonial. Well, just say a little bit about that. Thank
you. Thank you, Kasia. Yes, I mean, decolonizing is the term, as we know, that's used for the process that countries in Asia and Africa the process through which, this process began in the 1940s, the process through which they free themselves from Western rule. And decolonization, even in that sort of early anti-colonial thought, is actually a quite an it's Frantz Fanon describes it in The Wretched of the Earth as a complete disorder. So it's not just sort of becoming a nation state or becoming free, but he says it's a program of complete disorder, one that makes spectators crushed with their inessentiality into privileged actors. And he says, this is again in Wretched of the Earth, in one of the essays in Wretched of the Earth, he says, it brings with it a new language and a new humanity. Now, I mean, this was a question that, I asked myself at several points while editing and also writing my introduction and chapters, that why are we talking about decolonization after the post-colonial? I mean, we have with us, Ato, who has, he has written several sort of very, very scholarly introductions to post-colonial studies, post-colonial literature and culture, and I think that is kind of the entry point for why we use decolonizing in the title. That it's something that comes after incomplete post-colonization or incomplete post-coloniality, that we are still sort of we are yet to make full sense of the afterness of this violence of colonialism that was visited on languages, literatures, cultures, ontologies. And it's this kind of critical gesture of turning to history, of rethinking it, and to understand both that failed post-colonialism. And also, I really like this term. It's coined by Beardon Jafo. He says arrested decolonization. And this is very, I mean, there's a lot of sort of writing on decolonization, which said that this is sort of far greater than anti-colonial struggles, in the sense that it is about a new direction, that Fanon says in The Wretched of the Earth, that we have to combine our muscles and our bones to address it. And his version of decolonization, which I think kind of really resonates well with the way in which we have used decolonizing, is it's not just the attempt to recover or achieve national identity, but it is really about this collective attempt to dismantle the psychological foundations of colonial rule. And that's very much the way in which we are looking at, this decolonizing project. And the time for this project is the present. It's not about looking back to the past, but looking at the present, so that we do not achieve a future that's prescripted by the past. And I also want to, in this kind of in this word salad of decolonizing, anti-colonial, post-colonial, and also decolonial, address the way in which we have used the word decolonial. So, this, of course, as you know, was inaugurated by theorists such as Walter Mignolo and Catherine Walsh and Arturo Escobar. And this is kind of very much, I mean, it really is, we were talking about Frantz Fanon a minute ago, very much kind of a discourse from below, or thinking from below. And it's also sort of, drawing on different local histories across the globe and different lived experiences. Now, so we are very much in tune with that. We are very much in tune with this actively contesting coloniality's totalizing claims and its epistemic universality. But as Ato and I, we would say to each other, our subject is the English literary curriculum. So we can't de-Westernize and de-link from Western modes of thinking in the way that the decolonial theorists propose. So some of our authors have taken that prefix D to break up Western totalities into, and I really like this quote by Walter Mignolo's, to break up Western totalities into multiple temporalities, multiple knowledges and praxis of living. But our primary aim is to kind of not so much sort of dismantle, but add and augment and supplement. And I'm not talking about tokenist inclusions, but also contextualization of literary scholarship in the history and afterlives of not just colonialism, but also, of course, Atlantic slavery. And Paul Giles, in his essay on decolonizing the university, talks about, he draws on this term that's emerged from decolonial theory, and he talks about our commitment to critical cosmopolitan pluriversalism as opposed to universalism, and so that's very much what we take. But we are also kind of constantly mindful that you cannot quite absent the West or Western modes if you are wanting to kind of in a way renew or renovate the English literary curriculum? I'll hand over to Ato.
Well, just quickly, one of the prime points that the Mignolo and Walsh also use or press forward is that decolonial thinking ought to return us all to indigenous epistemologies. They, of course, writing from Latin America, where the idea of indigeneity has had a particular kind of salience. However, there are contexts in which the claims to indigeneity can also lead to narrow forms of ethno-nationalism, such as, for example, we see in Malaysia, where on independence in the early 60s, the Malay government declared Malay the official language. But this was actually to set aside the Chinese and Indian communities who were in English-speaking minorities. And by the 1970s, there was a lot of ethnic riots and all kinds of things happened. Or in the case of India, which Ankhi will be better pleased to comment on, where the claims to authentic indigeneity are also designed to exclude certain populations from the nationalist discourse. So the decolonial, I can see how useful it might be. But for us, and Ankhi has said this already, we cannot completely delink. For example, Soyinka's theory of tragedy was drawn on Nietzsche. It was drawn on both Nietzsche and on Yoruba cosmology. So it would be hard to say, let us ignore Soyinka's actually admiration for Nietzsche from his also obvious penchant for thinking through Yoruba cosmology. So for us, this is the English literary curriculum. It's all intertwined and interleaved.
Yes,
Do you want to add anything? Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, just to very quickly add that, yes, exactly. That is always the fear that this kind of feeds into some kind of ethno-nationalist, let's go back to a primordial past. And then every successive, entrant to the Indian civilization becomes an intruder, becomes an aggressor, and this is a very dangerous sort of like way to think about, kind of the national past when, and it really also does kind of serious harm to indigeneity in the place. I mean, as you know, sort of even with Hindus in India, we are actually intruders and sort of and newcomers compared to the indigenous populations of India. And I just want to say that also, I mean, for us, that there's also not that kind of triumphalism that can sometimes come with this kind of, sort of delinking and de-westernizing. And I always think about the really wonderful introduction to Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark, where she is trying to sort of recover, not discover, not sort of implant, but recover the sort of Black presence in American literature, which she says informs its kind of, very language, its very style, etc. And she says that I want to draw a map, critical geography, and this is the telling bit, without the mandate of conquest. That it's a kind of like, so that's kind of what we were doing. We are drawing new maps. We are trying to use that map as a space for discovery, for intellectual adventure, and we are kind of charting this new kind of world, but without the mandate of conquest.
Thank you. Maybe you could develop some of these ideas in relation to thinking about the organization of the book, because you have 4 quite distinct sections on identities, methodologies, interdisciplinarity and literary studies, and then finally canon revisions. I wonder if we could say something a little bit about each of those.
I can start. I mean, as you said
Yes.
on your first reading, Kasia, these are not airtight divisions. So, for instance, my essay in the identity section has overlaps with Jean Marie Jackson's chapter on African literature. So, I say that Black British literature is not an isomorphism for Black identity, and she speaks of the perils of mining African literary texts for their ethnographic, or what she calls pseudo ethnographic insights. So. And also, when we were doing the different sections, we didn't want to lose sight on the other terms of the title. So not just
Mhm.
decolonizing, but English, literacy,
Yes.
and also, of course, curriculum.
Yes.
And I talk a little bit about, I'm looking at the table of contents here. I'll talk a little bit about, a few of the contributions. So, for instance, Joe Cleary's chapter in the identities section does just that. So, pay attention to the different terms of the title, providing an overview of the English department in Ireland as it sort of evolves from this colonial system to a sort of modern international university. And he says that this has developed over time, but it cannot be decolonized without what we are doing now, which is a
Yes.
reckoning with the past.
Yeah.
And then in the methodology section, you have a chapter by Elizabeth McMahon, where she provides pedagogical strategies for decolonizing literary studies in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, and she does this with guidelines that are drawn from Aboriginal authors and also indigenized pedagogies. So, the strategies, she recommends quite a few strategies, pedagogical strategies, and they're philosophical. They're sort of about decolonizing historical consciousness, but they're also very pragmatic. They are relating to transcription, archiving, methods of research, and citation. And I felt the same sort of balance between the philosophical and pragmatic in Ato's chapter, for instance, Reading for Justice, which pulls off this sort of, kind of high wire balancing act between the great tradition, this rarefied idea of literature, but also sort of literature's worlding in relation to, questions of social equity and racial justice. And he also has recommendations. One of the recommendations is this, what he calls an interleaving. And I want to read out this sentence, where he says, as if what you're reading is part of a larger set of cross-cultural illuminations, is to be open to finding out more about how such cross-cultural illuminations take place. So this is one thing, I will talk about the other sections, but I think this is a very important feature of the essays, that they can telescope from the abstract and the metaphysical and the philosophical to how exactly you carry this out in a classroom or in your own research. In the interdisciplinarity section, Christopher Krenz, he argues that, post-colonial and disability studies are and should always be allied in their interrogation of power. Again, in the interdisciplinary section, you have Ronald Charles decolonizing the Bible as literature and demonstrating how, in a way, the book of Revelation has been misused to subjugate Haitian Christians. And finally, you have the kind of a kind of very meaty bit of the book, which is the canon revision section, where we have experts in different fields of literary study tackle specific pedagogical challenges. The teaching of pre-modern literature, especially the European Middle Ages. How do you teach this with the counter canonical? Or, Shakespeare is a site of cultural contestation in the US Mexico borderlands. And in an interesting sort of bookend to the Cleary chapter on the changing fortunes of the English department in Ireland, you have William Ghosh examining the evolving ways in which scholars and teachers have understood, the coloniality of practices, as he says, that they have inherited. And you also have, you have Devjani Ganguly talking about the multilingual provenance of global Anglophone worlds, just as Akshaya Saxena in a different section had talked about English as a vernacular, not a language of power and dominance. And again, there is also always in throughout these sections, there's a return to the autobiographical, there's a self-situation situation. So I really like that moment in the Nigel Leask chapter. This is a magisterial overview of Romantic studies where he ponders his own title of Regius Professor at the University of Glasgow, saying that, this is established by Queen Victoria in 1862 in response to the introduction of competitive exams for the Indian civil service, in which 1/4 of the marks you would be awarded was for proficiency in English language and literature. And in all the sections, there's a wide range of genres and styles that we are looking at. We're looking at language, so poetry, anthology, fiction, short story, autobiography, performance, including Instagram live sessions.
Thank you.
So just quickly, the other aspect of the divisions is that it's also to showcase the different kinds of decolonizing the curriculum that might be found in different contexts. So decolonizing the curriculum is not a one dress fits all. So that Ankhi has already mentioned the chapter by Elizabeth McMahon, which is a very wonderful and situated chapter on Aboriginal literature and how it might infuse and change Australian and New Zealand writing, is done firmly grounded in the history of settlement. So it's a critique of the curriculum, but it's also a critique of how settler colonialism distorts both past and present. And then she gives template for how these might be addressed as part of decolonizing the curriculum, or indeed Ronald Charles's chapter on the Bible, which is decolonial in a different sense, because in his case, he does what I think is a magnificent resituation of the book of Revelations in the context of its time. Why the mythical war between the various mythological figures and the Christ, the followers, and how that mythological war can also be transposed into the identification of different kinds of enemies. And then what he does is not simply say we need to read it differently. He contextualizes it in the context of Haiti, where now Revelations is being used to hound different categories of people. So you can see how the decolonizing starts from the biblical interpretation, exegesis, to its effect in the real world, given
Today.
as context. So that's the other objective that we had, was to show that there are different modalities of decolonizing the curriculum. There are a lot of other examples that these will serve for now.
But also the book is about, as you both said really at the beginning, that it's about now, and that forever, in all the cases where history is explored and the importance of engaging with history, but it's kind of taking that story up to date and saying where does that take us today. And also, I think one of the great things about the book is how many contributors from all over the world, and writing about very different different places and different issues in those places. Yeah. In relation to that, how do you see the kind of the book working alongside other initiatives to decolonize universities and the broader culture, like Rhodes Must Fall, or other kinds of initiatives? And I'm thinking, for example, about the makeup of the student body and the faculty bodies in the universities in which we are, but also in other places as well. So how does the book participate in this wider conversation, do you think?
Okay, one of the things that we state in our introduction, which is picked up in different chapters, is that decolonizing the curriculum, to put it in the most crude way, is not just about giving space to Black people or to racial minorities. It is about finding the intersections of inequities amongst what we call equity-seeking groups. And historically, there have been many equity-seeking groups that have challenged the curriculum: women, Jews, Muslims, disabled people, trans people, and so on. The point about decolonizing the curriculum is that the best way to do it is to, as much as possible, to identify intersectionalities of different equity seeking groups, because often the texts that we read have multiple oppressions. So it may seem that a work written by a racial minority may be good for the relevant racial minorities, but may be insensitive to disabled people, for example. So that's another thing that so how does it then join the larger struggles of decolonizing the university? The thing is that every offense is an offense to everyone. Every oppression, it doesn't matter how small, whether it is to the littlest amongst us all or to the biggest, it should be taken as an offense for us. So this is just the decolonizing idea as a principle is an orientation for us to be sensitive to variant oppressions. So I wouldn't be happy if the book was read just for us to be sensitive to the oppression of Black folk or of women. Everyone that is oppressed is oppressed. We need to be. So that the objective is to give us a sense of awareness and sensitivity. But the sensitivity comes from starting from the classroom. We study these things. We love what we do. We're not dismissing the beauty of English literature. We love what we do, but want to find a way of establishing, no matter how tenuous, a link between what we love and what we read and what we write on and the ways of the world itself. And so there is a way in which to clarify the way we read literature will help us to also clarify the way we grasp oppressions in the world and do something about them.
Thank you.
I really like the phrase Ato mentioned, the intersection of inequities. And I think that's a really powerful way in which our book is trying to really connect with the different kinds of conversations. And I'm very mindful that, I'm kind of, both Ato and I, we are we are functioning out of very, very world leading universities. They're centers of power. There's a very good sort of collection edited by Gurminder Bhamra and others, it's called Decolonizing the University, where she says that the Western University is the privileged site of knowledge production. So I'm very aware of kind of, especially in my case, being in the heart of empire. I mentioned Curzon earlier. He came back and he was whatever chancellor, vice chancellor of Oxford. So there are these kind of very important connections between the university and kind of the heart of empire, and of course in the case of my university, sort of colonial soul making and questioning also. So you're absolutely right that it is not just about adding to kind of providing more jobs to Black folks, but though that is definitely something that I think the UK has been fairly slow in kind of in that reckoning. One of the little statistical bits that still blows my mind, it came out, it was HESA data that there are 350 Black female professors, of whom I'm one, so they're counting Asians as Black as well, and out of a total of 18,000 professors. So, Black women make up 2% of the professoriate. So, that's definitely also a struggle. But I do want to kind of, go back to what Ato was saying about that sort of intersection of inequities and say that we are in this position, privileged position, a hard-won privilege in my case and also in Ato's case, to question what happens to structures of knowledge when it is sort of being mediated through our bodies, when it's mediated through, I wrote What is a Classic because I found it very absurd that someone who's from a small town in India should be transmitting the canon the way I was doing. And so, I mean, who is the subject of knowledge and who is the object? Robbie Shilliam has this wonderful formulation that who is the knower and who is the known. And I do think that to some extent, being at university is a very, very important feature. Being at these universities, these very powerful kind of game-changing universities, is a very important part of the kind of impact that we hope this conversation will have.
Can I add something quickly
Absolutely.
about it's not just about being at privileged institutions of learning. Universities are places where we can cultivate doubt at leisure. So but the cultivation of doubt ultimately is character forming. It doesn't matter how small the university is. The objective is to cultivate doubt and alienation as part of character formation. And how better to cultivate doubt and interrogation of your own positions, class, racial, or otherwise, than to read about how these things have been done in literature, in philosophy, in history, and so on. And that can be done, obviously, in privileged places like Oxford and Stanford have more resources. But I was educated in a small university in Accra, which taught me much of what I know. And there, we were in doubt about everything all the time. And it was wonderful to be in doubt and to share our doubts with others. And then after that, at night, to go out drinking and talk foolishness and so on. So the university as the domain, the space where we can cultivate doubt at leisure. There's no pressure to find solutions to everything or anything even, but the cultivation of doubt as a necessary value in and of itself. And where better to start than reading well?
And in a sense, the book is about that, because the book doesn't have one solution or one answer to, because you have all these different contributors who come at the questions from very different backgrounds and very different angles. So, the experience as a reader myself, the experience is to read one essay and then have its kind of conclusions thrown into doubt by the next essay, and then you're kind of continually debating yourself with all the ideas. Absolutely. I mean, how do I suppose that so talking about raising all these issues and conveying your love of reading and thinking about things on a more practical level, the book, it's getting the book to people so that they can the more people that can read the book, the better. And Stanford University very kind of generously funded that the book should be open access. And I wonder if you could say something about the importance of open access to the book itself and to your ambitions for the book.
Okay, so let us lay it out quite plainly. Books are not known to be the cheapest in the market. So, and we're thinking of ourselves as students, as hungry scholars, but indigent, not very wealthy. But also, we're thinking of what this would mean for people coming from our parts of the world, in Africa and in India and various other parts of the global South, to have a volume like this. Free to download worldwide in perpetuity. My favorite bit is the in perpetuity bit. The free to download in perpetuity was something that we were driven to accomplish absolutely. And it's to the generosity of, and I need to mention her name, Professor Deborah Satz, who is the Dean of HNS here at Stanford, who, when I approached her, she saw it immediately. She immediately said yes and funded it. So that's one really important aspect of the decolonizing. But there will also be other platforms like Contours. It's very good. It's free. People see it hopefully in different parts of the world, and they'll hear our ideas and our discussion and so on. But we'll also continue to, as it were, promote the book. Ankhi and I are hoping to go to the Kolkata Literary Festival, where there are thousands and thousands of participants, and we'll talk up the book, because this is not a casual thing. This is a tenet of belief. So, but starting, of course, from free to download in perpetuity, it's a magnificent opportunity for people in different parts of the world to get access to these magnificent essays.
And to kind of add to that, I mean, that has made a huge difference to the way in which, I mean, I was saying to Ray before we started that Ato and I keep getting emails where people are saying they've read the book. This is not something I always feel about my monographs. They don't circulate quite so freely, simply because, as Ato has said, they are priced prohibitively for the general reader. And this is a collaborative volume. 27 of us have stood shoulder to shoulder, and and this kind of the Auerbachian, our philological home is the earth. It can no longer be the nation. This is very much where this book is going. It is, we can't possibly, in a limited amount of time, giving all the other books we are writing, all the other teaching and admin tasks we are doing, we can't provide full coverage, but we can start the conversation and people can pick it up there and write another decolonizing book. But what I'm saying is that it really makes sense for us. That's the sort of transferential circuit, that what we have not been able to cover, we can discuss. What we are continuing to think about and debate, we can do, if this is sort of downloadable in perpetuity. We are going to be kind of moving through time in a very interesting way, and not in the way that usual sort of academic monographs do. So I'm really, really appreciative of this kind of gift from Stanford, which I think has really changed the character of the way in which this book will be received.
And it's also kind of, in some ways, consistent with your title of emphasizing process, decolonizing, that as an ongoing process, and that the book's kind of long life and afterlife hopefully will be generating more books, more discussion, more doubts, more answers, and more debates. I think you've really made, you've really given a sense of what a wonderful and stimulating book you've edited. Now, I don't know if there's anything you want to say in conclusion, but I just wanted to say thank you very much for putting this book together and for talking about it. Is there anything finally?
We want to thank you, Kasia, for being such a
Sure.
generous interviewer. You've let us, talk well. But we also want to spend time thanking Ray Ryan. He's been a true believer. He's been a true believer of the project from the beginning, and we've had endless conversations with him about this aspect and that aspect and so on. So we do want to thank Ray for believing in the vision.
He's the literature, for those who don't know, he's the literature publisher.
Okay,
modern literature at CUP.
I assume that everyone knows him, but anyway.
No.
So he's the
on the podcast,
edited literature for Cambridge University. He's been a great thought partner from the beginning. He's been a very important thought partner. And also we want to thank the many people at CUP who, from copy editors to all the team, all of whom we cannot name, who have been, behind the scenes, assembling and bringing this magnificent volume to fruition. And we are hoping that people who gorgeous.
Just to show you once more. Yes.
I know.
Yeah.
So we are hoping that it will trigger. So it's not just that it will trigger more decolonizing volumes, but it will trigger debate. We want people to talk, to think about it. This is a field we are all passionate about. Yeah, so we are not dismissing English literary studies, far from it. It's quite the opposite. We want to re-engage, but want to re-engage with one eye to the outside world.
I mean, I would really follow up on that and really thank everyone. Thank Emma Goff-Leggett and Edgar Mendez, who've really helped us with the production of the book. Thank Ray, who has really been a massive sort of cheerleader, sending us all kinds of material as our own thoughts were crystallizing. I want to thank my wonderful partner in crime, Ato. We have really I have learned so much from just working with him. Thank you, Kasia, for reading this book in such a granular fashion. The first set of questions you read, it was you're an ideal reader for it. But I just wanted to, because this also goes back to the question on contours. I think, as Ato says, that it's not just, it's not, what we have done is not just some kind of a political act in disguise, but it's also it's really, it's a testimony to our own commitment to literature. It's the literary hour that we are discussing this on, and also to the humanities. Doubt humanities education as not a product of the neoliberal university, but a set of conjectures. And it is very interesting that this should come about. Ray is, of course, overseeing a lot of literature, the production of literary scholarship, but for him also to engage with this sort of deconstructive project, which is kind of trying to understand the ideology methodologies behind the way in which we read and write and teach. I think that really is a very, very sort of holistic way in which we can think of this, that it is kind of, it's a celebration of humanities, it's a celebration of literature and its sort of long memory, and it's kind of, hopefully viable future. But it's also sort of, a celebration of this kind of, collaborative scholarly thinking under the rubric of English literature.
I hope that the two of you, who seem to be a particularly dynamic duo, will come up with more ideas, and we'll watch this space. And I would be very happy to come back for your next book to host another Contours for you. But thank you very much indeed. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.